Hey everyone! Everybody always talks about the main purpose of life, but you ever stop and think about what the secondary purpose of life is? Well, that's where it gets controversial, because no one knows what it is. Main Ultraman. Everybody knows these guys. They're everyone's mom's friend. They're the Ultraman from the title, the namesake, and the Ultraman of the season. Ultraman Cosmos, Ultraman Leo, Ultraman Mebius, Ultraman Max. These guys, all main Ultraman. The Ultraman? Get out of here! But sometimes the series features more of these alien dudes within the series for reasons that we'll delve into later. The secondary Ultraman. Just like the main Ultraman, people do talk about these guys, albeit a little less, and they are very important, also albeit a little less. But for real, secondary Ultraman are Ultraman who are typically the second Ultraman to get some sort of focus in the show. Now these guys are typically not very common in Ultraman. The franchise tends to just have one new Ultraman in a single series. There's never been any official indication of the definition of a secondary Ultraman and which Ultraman is officially considered as one, but fans have come up with their own classification. It's usually another Ultraman who appears alongside the main Ultraman of the show. And a lot of times, these guys can easily steal the show. Just like how I stole these bananas. Okay, enough definitions. Let's look at some examples of these so-called secondary Ultras. The most clear-cut examples of this are Ultraman Agul and Ultraman Hikari. Now, I'm not trying to say they need to be blue to be secondary Ultras. Oh, we'll get to him later. Ultraman Agul was the rival to Ultraman Gaia, being the main opposing force of the first half of the show, and co-starred in almost as many episodes as Gaia, and even appeared solo in some of them. He was given just as much, if not more focus and development than Gaia in the series, which definitely made him a favorite in the series' run. Of course, he was also something pretty new in the realm of Ultraman heroes, considering he's the first Ultraman to be presented as an anti-hero, and not just any anti-hero, an edgy one. He was also the first to directly conflict with another Ultraman, something that's not very common even now. Agul is absolutely a prominent secondary Ultraman, considering the story and premise of Ultraman Gaia was built around having two Ultraman. At the climax of the conflict between the two giants, Agul realizes he f***ed up, and gives his power to Gaia, which gave him V2 and Supreme version. Ultraman shows typically end with all of the main heroes, the Ultraman, the attack team members, anybody else, and they all team up to defeat the final boss. And of course, that is the case with Gaia too, but the payoff to this dynamic was incredible, in part because of the interestingly crafted dynamic between the main and secondary Ultraman. Next is this blue guy who looks younger than he is, Ultraman Hikari. First I wanna say, it really feels like that for Mebius. They wanted to retread some things that worked in previous installments, and the prominent secondary Ultraman is one of them. At surface level, Hikari really is Agul 2.0, being a mysteriously edgy blue guy with a sword, whose methods may be in opposition to the main characters. However, their motives are very different, as Hikari doesn't have beef with Mebius due to any of their ideals like Gaia and Agul do. Hikari's arc in Ultraman Mebius constitutes the first saga of the show, the Bogal arc. Hikari, or known as Hunter Knight Tsurugi at this point, seeked to destroy Bogal, who had consumed a planet that he loved. Eventually, he and Mebius and Guys come to an understanding. Bogal was defeated and he became a recurring character who supported Mebius on occasion. And similar to Agul, he gave his power to Mebius as a power-up and eventually fought alongside him in the final battle. And with their combined power, they became Mebius Phoenix Brave. But what about the other secondary Ultraman whom the fanbase have labeled as such? Okay, how about newer Ultraman series? Trigger Dark is seen by many fans as Ultraman Trigger's secondary Ultra. At surface level, he also goes through the same story beats as Agul and Hikari, being an edgier Ultraman who, at first, is an enemy but eventually becomes an ally. But this is a weird one because Trigger Dark, is he a real Ultraman? Or is he more like Juggler's Juggler who's the superpowered alien but isn't advertised as an Ultraman? I think it doesn't matter. But yeah, Trigger Dark is kinda like Trigger's makeshift secondary Ultraman, and in the end, the two combine powers to give birth to Trigger Truth. Ultraman Blue. Now this one I can say isn't a secondary Ultraman like the ones that we've seen before. Sure, he's the second Ultraman in a team of two heroes, but he gets equal billing as his brother Ultraman Rosso in the title, appears at the same time in the first episode, and shares a lot of privileges together, even never failing to be built together in future shows and advertising. That's because Rosso and Blue are dual protagonists, that's the novelty of their home show, and they both combine to become Ultraman Rube. But Ultraman Victory also always shows up alongside Ginga in future commercials and stuff, despite definitely being seen as a secondary Ultraman to Ginga. Now this case is a bit different, as Victory first appeared in Ginga's second series, making him the shiny new hero of that year, and subsequently the face of Ultraman Ginga S, and then they combine into Ultraman Ginga Victory. I don't know if you've noticed the subliminal messages, but let's just lay it out here. It seems like the fate of secondary Ultraman is to somehow combine their power with the main Ultraman for them to get stronger, most commonly through fusions like Rube, Ginga Victory, Phoenix Brave, heck even Gaia Supreme was a result of Agul's power given to Gaia. What happened to secondary Ultraman's rights? No wonder Agul had an existential crisis. I kinda hope that if there's ever another secondary Ultraman in the future, they will eventually fuse with the main Ultraman, because man, this is becoming predictable. But of course, that's just me and I'm a pretty jaded person, so I hope that instead, there's a secondary Ultraman who barely shows up but still combines with the main hero in the end. Oh Tsuburaya, you always know what to give. Ultraman Justice is designated among many fans as Cosmos' secondary Ultraman. He was an ally of Cosmos, their relationship got a bit rocky, they eventually became friends again, the works. But Justice only showed up in the movies, never in the series itself. So can he really be considered a secondary Ultraman? Well, according to Tsuburaya, yes. Also, we have Ultra 721, who's definitely a secondary Ultraman to Neos, showing up for support very frequently in his home series, even making an impression as a unique Ultraman because he's one of those who doesn't have a fixed human form. Oh yeah, we have to talk about him. Astra, everybody's favorite little brother. For a time, all he was known for was being Leo's younger sibling. Now, Astra was a recurring side character in Ultraman Leo, showing up a couple of times to help him fight the monster of the week. Originally, Leo thought that he was dead, but turns out he was alive, which is why he only showed a good number of episodes after the show began. He was very prominent and the focus in the two-part episodes, The Ultra Brothers vs the Leo Brothers, where he was framed by Alien Babalu and did evil things, prompting the Ultra Brothers to happily dispose of him. I did say that Agul was the first one to openly oppose another Ultra, but this one can be considered as one of the earlier examples, although it was clearly an example of a misunderstanding and it was more because of Babalu's framing of Astra instead of them really wanting to go at it with each other. Funnily enough, the same thing happened to Ultraman Hikari. Secondary Ultras, get your shit together! Another secondary of the Showa era may be Yulian, the princess of the Land of Light, who spent the better part of her screen time in her human form, only appearing in her Ultra form twice. This poster is a lie. In fact, Astra doesn't show up too often too, so he's definitely not the same kind of secondary Ultra from the two blue guys, but instead of fusing with the main guys, Yulian and Astra have sick combination attacks with them, which is very neat. Astra and Yulian are secondary Ultras by definition, due to them first appearing in their respective series, and are the second new Ultra to appear, which extends to Ultraman Xenon as well, who appeared like twice in Ultraman Max, making him Max's secondary Ultraman, but his entire personality is based around being Max's supporting character. By definition, this also makes Zophy a secondary Ultraman too, and also by proxy, the very first one. He first appeared in the original series in the final episode. He's the second Ultraman introduced in this series and in the franchise ever, so yeah, secondary Ultraman. It's that simple? But if they appear every so often like some novelty, what gives them the privilege of the title of a secondary character over characters like Jack in Ultraman Leo or Zophy in Ultraman Taro? Yes, I think that secondary Ultramen are considered different than guest characters. Although it kinda depends on who you're asking. At least for me, guest characters are like fan service. They're here to get people excited. In fact, shoving more Ultra Brothers in the Showa series was a tactic that the showrunners liked to use to up the TV ratings, and is still applicable today. Ultraman Z in Ultraman Trigger, best thing since sliced bread. Ultra 7 in Return of Ultraman, sure, I'll take a day off for that. Father of Ultra in Ultraman 80, sure, why not? Also, it goes without saying, but guest characters are typically Ultraman who were already established previously. Which leads us to Ultraman Zero's appearance in Ultraman Geed. At first glance, he looks like a guest character, plain and simple, but then, he stayed in the series a bit longer than you'd think. Ultraman Zero is often called a secondary Ultraman in his appearance in Ultraman Geed. In this show, he had to take salaryman Leito Igaguri as his host due to being previously weakened. Also, due to Belial's plans, he needed to stay in Geed's world on standby. Hence, Zero became a mainstay in the series, effectively having his own character arc and narrative importance in the story. A lot of fans regard this as his best showing in the franchise because of how much his character develops in such an interesting way by pairing up his cocky attitude with a timid family man, both of which grow and learn from each other. Not to mention, Geed was also supposed to be the end of the Belial saga once and for all, so of course his arch enemy Zero had to play a part. So this, to me, shows that secondary Ultraman isn't just about when they first appeared or stuff, but also the unique role that they play in the series as a supporting character. Zero ultimately did not combine powers with Geed, but he did give us the longest transformation sequence known to mankind. I love secondary Ultraman. They always make the show they're in more interesting and give it more character. Secondary heroes are a lot more common in hero shows like Kamen Rider, while Ultraman doesn't really do it so often. In fact, Ultraman rarely even introduces more than 3 Ultraman per series. This makes sense considering Rider and Ultraman are pretty different stories with different things to tell and different appeals, plus the novelty of having a secondary Ultraman would wear off fast if they did it every year. However, when they do, it's usually backed up with interesting ideas and something special to contribute to the series' unique identity. I can never imagine Ultraman Gaia without Agul, and I can never imagine Ultraman Geed without Zero. Each of the secondary Ultraman that I've listed just now have played different kinds of supporting roles in each of their series, and they're not just secondary Ultraman, but are special in their own right. I'm tired of thinking about the main purpose of life, so I've just decided to mail order the answer. Let's see what it says here. You need to combine your powers with someone else to make them stronger? God damn it!